Hi everyone! Drawing from my research and experience growing up in South Africa, this video will be diving into J.M. Coetzee's Disgrace and its South African cultural and historical context for readers to have a deeper understanding of the 1999 novel. In this video, the 2024 published Penguin Vintage Classics edition of Coetzee's Disgrace is used for reference. To give a very brief introduction to the author, J.M. Coetzee was born in 1940 in Cape Town, South Africa, where a number of his books, including Disgrace, are set in. He is a descendant of Afrikaner parents who have a Dutch heritage, historically having settled in South Africa. He spent some time working abroad in the UK and the US and returned to South Africa to work as a professor in English language and literature between 1972 and 2002. He has since moved to Australia and became the recipient of the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2003. Some of his other notable books that you might be familiar with are his 1980 Waiting for the Barbarians, his 83 Life and Times of Michael Kay, and his 86 Foe, inspired by Daniel Defoe's Robinson Crusoe. In Coetzee's Disgrace, land ownership is a crucial theme illustrated through the ownership and expansion of Petrus's land bordering Lucy's farmhouse. This portrayal in Disgrace is especially significant considering South Africa's history of land conflict. The following is a brief history of the land conflicts leading to, during, and after apartheid. Often seen as the beginning of the legislative segregation of South Africa, the 1913 Natives Land Act was passed, which reserved only 7% of the geographical land to the majority 67% black population residing in the country. This led to many consequences in the black communities where black farmers were forced to lose their farms and work as low-wage laborers for white farms. In 1948, apartheid, an Afrikaans term which is the noun form of separation, began. With the new apartheid government, the segregation which had already existed since the colonization from the Dutch in the 17th century and the British in the 19th century became systemized. In 1950, the Group Areas Act was passed, where different areas were allocated for specific racial groups. Urban, developed, industrial, and business areas were reserved for white ownership, and many black communities were forcibly removed from their towns. In 1994, the apartheid regime finally came to an end under international pressure. In an effort to restore land forcibly taken away from the black population, the post-apartheid government passed the Restitution of Land Rights Act, active between 94 and 98. Compensation was made through returning land ownership or economic compensation based on the cost of the land. However, these efforts were seen by many as unsatisfactory, as many applications for restitution were left pending, and the return of land itself relied very heavily on the later owners willing or unwilling to give up their ownership, which resulted in considerable legal hurdles and conflict. Pent-up frustration from the violent history of segregation, including that of the forced removal of land ownership, saw many consequences, such as 1998 becoming the peak year for white farm murders. There were 153 recorded murders, often preceded by acts of torture. This was followed by the highest number of attacks on white farms, adding up to 1,068 cases in 2001. The aftermath of the land conflicts and its consequences can further be seen through how a radical political group continued to sing a song called Kill the Boers, Boers being a term for white Afrikaner farmers, which was sung actively from the 1980s through to the 2010s. Only 5 years after the end of apartheid, and amidst the height of attacks on white farms, J.M. Coetzee's Disgrace was published in 1999. The anxiety and violence of post-apartheid South Africa is clearly expressed in Coetzee's book, as we see David Lurie describing how, quote, "It happens every day, every hour, every minute," he tells himself, "in every quarter of the country. Count yourself lucky to have escaped with your life. Count yourself lucky not to be a prisoner in the car at this moment, speeding away or at the bottom of a donga with a bullet in your head." Recently, in 2025, the discussion of the attack on white farms was brought to attention again by President Trump, where he declared the attacks as a genocide and the white Afrikaner farmers as refugees of the genocide in his Oval Office meeting with President Ramaphosa. This caused considerable debates and backlash, as the number of white farm attacks have substantially decreased and is presently a rare occurrence. In the following section, we will be focusing more on Coetzee's book itself and the symbolic post-apartheid and apartheid terms you might have missed in Disgrace. As discussed earlier, the idea of a house and home ownership cannot be discussed without keeping in mind the history of forcible removals and the physical geographical segregation. The remnants of David's familiarity of living separately from the black population during the apartheid era is made clear in the following quote, where he expresses, quote, "Too close," he thinks. "We live too close to Petrus. It is like sharing a house with strangers, sharing noises, sharing smells." In this next quote, as a part of the black population, Petrus's dream of home ownership, which was historically prohibited in the white areas, gains much more significance, where we see in the following quote that, quote, "Petrus's house has become a reality." The next term, shanty settlements, is very briefly mentioned in the book, and these shanty settlements are informal settlements built as a result of rapid rural to urban migration and poverty. These settlements are also known as squatter camps, or in the case of Brazil, favelas, where the shanty settlements are generally occupied by black communities in South Africa and can be seen as a part of the long-term consequences of the 1950 Group Areas Act, which allocated the majority of urban areas to the white population. While working with Petrus at the farmers' market, David Lurie comments how it feels, quote, "just like the old days, boss and class," which is an Afrikaans idiom meaning boss and servant. In this way, we are exposed to fragments of David's racism from having lived under the apartheid regime. Other historically embedded terms used in Coetzee's Disgrace include dogman. This is significant as the apartheid government and police used to train their police dogs to specifically attack only black people. These dogs were also used to assist in forcibly chasing out black communities after the Group Areas Act was passed in 1950. Black people were also often compared to dogs in a dehumanizing manner. So this explains why Petrus smiles in this following quote, where he says, quote, "I look after the dogs and I work in the garden." Yes, Petrus gives a broad smile. I am the gardener and the dog man. He reflects for a moment. The dog man, he repeats, savoring the phrase. In this quote, we see the irony of Petrus being the dog man, which is simultaneously a reference to the derogatory name-calling, as well as the position of the apartheid police as caretakers of the racially trained police dogs. Now, Petrus is the one taking care of the dogs owned by a white woman. Another form of derogatory name calling was referring to black men as boy, a way of kind of opposing and not agreeing that these men are fully grown men. This again explains Petrus's amusement when a reversal of the apartheid era occurs, as he gives David a task that is so easy that it is, quote, just a job for a boy. With the end of the apartheid era, we see Coetzee writing that, quote, once Petrus was a boy, now he is no longer. Now he can play at being one as Marie Antoinette could play at being a milkmaid. Another sensitive term in the South African context specifically is the use of referring to a person of a different ethnicity as you people. Due to the history of segregation, the referral of your people or our people is often seen as a racist act of verbally segregating different ethnicities by not accepting them as a part of the country's people. This context explains why David and Petrus appears to be fixated on the pronouns you, your, we, and my in the following quotes. In the first quote, we see David confronting Petrus's defense of Pollux, one of the attackers on Lucy's farm, where he exclaims, quote, your child. Now he is your child, this Pollux. To which Petrus replies, yes, he is a child. He is my family, my people. And after hearing this, David thinks, so that is it. No more lies. My people. As naked an answer as he could wish. Well, Lucy is his people. David then continues to think, quote, we. He is on the point of saying, we Westerners. So here we can see this racially loaded use of pronouns. To conclude this video, I wanted to touch on how South Africa and the scene of Coetzee's Disgrace is what Mary Louise Pratt calls a contact zone. Pratt uses this term to, quote, refer to social spaces where cultures meet, clash, and grapple with each other, often in contexts of highly asymmetrical relations of power, such as colonialism, slavery, or their aftermaths as they are lived out in many parts of the world today. In this sense, South African history is rich with multiple instances of contact zones from when the Dutch and the British colonized the country on different occasions, as well as the apartheid regime and the post-apartheid era where the formerly segregated black and white communities had to transition into each other's physical and cultural spaces. Set in this post-apartheid contact zone, J.M. Coetzee's Disgrace demonstrates the violence and anxieties arising from the meeting, clashing, and grappling of the formerly segregated black and white communities. His novel also illustrates the mingling of different languages in the contact zone, a characteristic Mary Louise Pratt mentions, where in a particular scene we see David Lurie watching television, describing how the commentary alternated between Sotho and Xhosa, languages of which he understands not a word. J.M. Coetzee's Disgrace is a complex and profound work in that even in seemingly fleeting scenes, such as David simply watching television and Petrus's small reactions to seemingly plain words, these are all embedded with historical and cultural forces at work in the South African context. So, keeping in mind these historical and cultural contexts, I hope this video offered a little bit more insight into a rich understanding and reading of J.M. Coetzee's Disgrace. Thank you for watching this video.